Hello, this is part 7 of the MEANJS tutorial. So in our last video we just finished creating our post service, which helps us access our API for creating, deleting, and retrieving posts. And now we are going to start working on our controller tests. And again, we're going to implement the tests before the actual methods for the controller, like we've done before. You can see in these before each statements, all of the necessary services are being injected that we're going to use in our tests. Most importantly, the HTTP backend service, which we'll use to mock HTTP requests. And we're going to create a fake post for our tests, like so. We can specify the fields that we want. So for the ID, we can just make up any sequence of letters and numbers we want. We need a title. We'll just call it sample post, and some text. We'll just say hello world. And now we can write our tests. So let's get rid of this default text here. What we're actually going to do is separate our tests into describe blocks like this. So we'll make one for each of the functions we're going to test. So now we can make specific variables for each of our tests, like so. Let's say before each we're just going to put our fake post into an array. Now we can write our first test. So we'll say it should return array with at least one post. We have to inject the function. This is a little bit different than what we've written on the server side. So now we can use our HTTP backend service. We're going to use the expect_get function, which will output or pass our test if our function sends an HTTP GET request to this URL. And it will send the response with whatever we put into the response function field here. So now when we call our scopes, our controller scopes method, it will pass this part of the test if our controller actually makes the HTTP call. Otherwise, we'll fail the test at that point. And we need to flush the response output. And now we can write our assertion. So we expect scopes.post. So we're going to store the response array in this post variable when we end up writing our controller. And we will use toEqualData to compare it to the sample post variable that we created here earlier. So now moving on to our create record test. In this one we're going to need another variable to mark the post field data. So this is just going to be an object with the same title and text fields. We're going to also need to set our scopes title and text fields. So this is acting as if the form fields we made earlier and bound to the ng model were actually filled in. And one more thing, we're going to need to use this spy on function. This is part of the testing framework, and this lets us actually watch what happens to this object's path method when it gets called. So this method should send a post request. It should empty the form fields and it should redirect to the form URL. So we're going to use the HTTP backend again, but this time we're going to expect a post to the same URL, and we're going to expect it to post this specific data, and it should respond with our fake post data. So then we can call the scope.create, and we're going to make our create function pass a true or false parameter to check whether the form input is valid, and we're going to just have it flush the output, and we can start writing our assertions. So we expect the form field to be empty. And we also have to check our location. Because we set the spy on, we can check the most recent location call. It should be to the form route. Now let's go ahead and write our last test. And again, we don't need to be putting all of this initialization in a before each block, but this makes it easier when you're going to write multiple tests for all kinds of different scenarios. So in this last test, we just put it all into one block. So it should send a delete request, and the post array should be empty. So now in our HTTP backend, we should expect a delete, and this time we're going to write a regular expression. So we're going to want it to have a URL that matches this regex. And since there are 12 digits in our fake post ID, we're going to make it have 12 characters here to pass. And we'll just respond. This time we'll respond with a 204. Then we'll just call scope.delete and give it the posted delete. And we should expect scope.post to be, or actually the length of the post to be 0. And we also have to initialize the post with something. So we can just do that. And we need to refresh our HTTP backend. With that. So now we can actually go to our controller and implement one of our methods. So we're going to inject the post service. And let's get rid of our hard-coded post that we created earlier. So let's create the find function. All that's going to do is set scope.post equal post.query. So this first function is pretty simple. Let's try to run our tests. So instead of running all our tests, what we can do is run the test client task in grunt. And it seems we have a couple syntax errors. So one in our services file and one in our tests. So we just need a comma there. And in our test file, so in our scope.find test, it should actually be sample post in our response in our fake test. And I believe another error was the post services has an S here. So let's try to run our test again. And our first test should at least pass. So I skipped forward a bit, but it looks like 2 out of 3 tests are failing. So we'll work on those in the next video.